Let's bring in our political panel this afternoon, Grahame Morris and Darren Barnett. Thanks to you both for being there. Grahame, first to you on the JobKeeper plan. My colleague Andrew Clennell reporting some detail out of the budget, which will see JobKeeper end in March. It's been extended to March. There was a view that it might be extended further, but it's obviously played a very important role through this period. Is the government, backing the fact that the economy will be chugging back to life by then?
Well, I think it will be timed by about March. Even people with two broken legs have got to get rid of the crutches at some stage, and you can't keep propping things up if it's unnecessary. And I think we need a proper feel for how business is going to cope, big business, small business, jobs, what's the real job figure? And we're never going to get that until these prop-up programs, which have been fantastic, but, come March, geez, are we really expecting the taxpayers to keep footing this bill, perhaps in most states unnecessarily, but after March?
It's a fair point, isn't it, Darren Barnett, when you look at the fact that it's costing a massive amount, but also there is this phenomenon of, zombie companies out there actually, basically being propped up that essentially we need to test the true state of the economy at some point.
That's true, and I think you'll find that some sectors have changed. Retail would be one example, that people selling via shop fronts on an old sort of, the main street of Paddington, or maybe even in a shopping centre, that a lot of those sales would have shifted to online sales. So I think we're going to see some emerging businesses and some other sort of more static businesses that may struggle. But equally, I'm a little bit surprised by the government giving such strong indication for ending JobKeeper in March, given we may well be into the electoral cycle by the end of next year. It's a bit surprising that they might be looking to remove the floor for what could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in an election year. So maybe that pushes the timing of the next election out into 2022, which I think a lot of people are expecting it to be next year.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are, that's for sure, for the election. As for the state elections, we know there's one only a few weeks away, Grahame, in Queensland. There was a view that Annastacia Palaszczuk might not budge until after that election, but she has. And Stephen Marshall also with some significant announcements on the borders today, Grahame.
Yeah, and about time for both of them. It'll be interesting perhaps not this election, but the next one. I know that's a long way off, but perhaps the next one. Will small business and their families react like they did to Paul Keating? They never forgave him for 17% interest rates. And it'll be interesting to see all of those towns along the East Coast that rely on tourism, for example. Will they and their families and small business, will they ever forgive the Palaszczuk government mixed with the virus for what it will have done to their business? Many of them are just not going to open. I think she'll probably scrape home this time. I think she took out a bit of insurance by opening some of the borders now, because the pressure was just building up, and some of those terrible, terrible, heartbreaking cases of people trying to get to hospitals, trying to see their kids, trying to see their dying grandma and couldn't, they were starting to hurt.
Darren, what's your take on this? Because it's also, we look at the economic impact. The jobless numbers last week were a surprise, down to 6.8%. But of the 180,000 jobs, full-time jobs created for the month, only 150 odd were created in Queensland. It's having a dire effect on tourism and beyond.
Definitely, and I think you'll find, I agree with Grahame, that what may be popular right now and gets through the state election may not be so popular in 4 years' time, or even sooner than that when we face a federal poll. I think at the moment there's still a lot of fear amongst particularly older voters that coronavirus needs to be stopped in its tracks, and they'd prefer that the borders stay in place so that, the numbers of new cases are confined to the southern states. But equally, when we get to that next election cycle, I think people will be pretty angry if their businesses and the jobs that they had within those businesses are not renewed once JobKeeper, I keep getting confused, but once JobKeeper is removed. So I think in the short term, it works well for state leaders to be tough on borders, but there could be a longer picture that we need to draw out.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. It's a shifting dynamic, that's for sure. Darren, first to you on the JobSeeker. You touched on it, so I'll go to you on it first. That's obviously the unemployment, the dole payment, New Start as it used to be called as well. There is a sense, I think an overwhelming sense, the government, not just for equity reasons, but for economic reasons, needs to keep that COVID supplement in place, if not permanently, well, for a fair while yet.
Yeah, certainly for a fair while yet, I agree. And I think most reasonable people think that an increase is warranted. It's been frozen for the best part of 2 decades, maybe not to the level that it has been during the pandemic, but certainly a little bit more than what it has been in the medium term and perhaps even into the longer term.
Grahame, your thoughts on that? Because, as I said, there are many economists who say it's the best stimulus out there.
Look, Kieran, I don't mind it being increased a bit, but if it is to be increased a bit, I would make the test for getting it much harder. I just don't think you can have this impression out there that people can actually live on this forever. I don't think there's any... Most taxpayers will say, yeah, I'll wear that, I'll wear an increase, but geez, I don't want to see any bludgers, I don't want it misused, and I want everybody who gets it to be out there looking for a job or trying to help other people look for a job. I think an increase would be acceptable, but under those conditions.
Finally, on the energy debate, we saw Angus Taylor today making his speech, the technology roadmap, and going on to terrain that I think would have been unlikely a few years ago within the coalition. And he's a Conservative, and I think more able to bring some of his fellow travellers along with him, Grahame.
I thought he so bamboozled the journos today and was so precise and clever that the journalists were saying, oh yeah, you achieved everything in 2020, you achieved it in 2030, but what about 2050? God, that's 10 elections off. And they were saying, oh, business wants to know. No, they don't. There's, 2 billionaires, 3 Greens, 2 journalists and a turtle just outside of Wagga who is focused on 2050. All the business people at the moment are focused on the next few years, and so they should be. Their current employees and what they're doing to get out of this COVID mess. I thought the combination of the government has said we're going to have gas, coal and wind, and then we're going to, in the short term, we're going to focus on gas, and then today they're saying there are these 5 other ones, like hydrogen. We're going to put 18 billion behind them and see if we can get one that works as insurance, and we'll be ahead of the curve for the rest of the world. It's good stuff.
Darren, what was your take on it? I think Tom Connell asked a really good question there in terms of the emissions reduction, but don't mention the target or the T word. We don't want to talk about the T word.
I think Angus Taylor could save a little bit of money on stationery from here and remove the emissions reduction from his job title. But that said, there is a lot in there and a little bit for everyone. Personally, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of a focus on renewables, but gas should always have been the transition away from coal towards a clean energy future. It allows that to happen using gas for the production of ammonium nitrate onshore, used for agricultural purposes. That's a good thing too. CCS is a little bit still unproven, and hydrogen is still a bit unproven, but that doesn't mean you can't put some money behind it to do the proper research. So look, a little bit more fossil fuel heavy than I would have personally liked, but there's a little bit in there for everybody.
Yep, couldn't agree more. I think it's a pragmatic way forward, and certainly a lot further than would have been expected a few years ago. Thanks, gents. Darren and Grahame. Talk to you soon.